Lyme disease is incredibly prevalent in our world right now. It is a powerful facet of many of our lives, and it is one of the most powerful spiritual teachers I have ever encountered. My name is Asia Suler. I'm a writer, teacher, the author of Mirrors in the Earth, and this is my story of how I healed from Lyme disease. So, chronic illness and chronic pain has been a large part of my life's journey. And one of my cycles dancing in that arena was working with Lyme disease. People have been asking me to share about my journey of healing from Lyme disease for many years now. And so I'm excited to finally be putting this information out into the world, to be sharing my story of how I healed from Lyme and what it taught me. So the first disclaimer I want to put up here is that everybody's story is different. Everyone's healing journey is going to look different. And that's the point. Because one thing that I found through working with thousands of people around the world in my client practice and in my teaching is that the way we heal from something shows us who we are and what we're meant to embody in this lifetime. And because of that, everybody's healing is going to look different. And so while I am excited to share my story and I hope that it's very helpful, I also want to honor the unique individuality of each one of our journeys. You know, this story is not intended to treat or diagnose, cure, or in any way prevent disease, but it is here to support and inspire and hopefully open a window into a world of possibilities. Now, a little preview before I get into the story of how I healed. I did not heal from Lyme disease in a conventional way. And what I have seen and what I have heard from many other practitioners who work with folks is that most often people who heal from chronic Lyme are not healing in conventional ways. That unconventional healing in many ways is one of the linchpins that helps people heal from this nebulous condition that is chronic Lyme disease. I had what I consider to be a energetic and spiritual healing from Lyme, and I'm going to talk exactly about what that looked like for me. And why I'm sharing this is that I want whoever is listening to this, if you are dealing with Lyme disease or if you are supporting other people moving through this, to open your mind to the possibilities of the various ways in which healing can take place. Because, as I said before, healing is so unique for each one of us in our lifetime. How we heal from something will show us the curriculum, why we're here and who we're meant to become. And for many, many people who contract Lyme disease, that curriculum is one that is deeply steeped in working in the fields of energetics and spirituality. So to start, let's ground in a reminder of what Lyme disease actually is. We're going to look at it briefly from a scientific lens, as well as looking at Lyme disease from a mythopoetic lens, which I find to be very helpful in understanding this disease. Lyme disease is still very mysterious. There's a lot we don't know, but we do know that Lyme is caused by an ancient bacterium, Borrelia burgdorferi, and this bacterium is a spirochete. Spirochetes are a very, very old form of bacteria. There are different strains, of course, of Lyme, but they're all spirochetes, and the spirochetes are named for their corkscrew shapes. These corkscrew shapes are part of what allow it to get into places that other bacteria can't, like into our ligaments, into our brain, into our nervous system. But one of the things that makes this bacterium really special or unique is that it is a shapeshifter. So Lyme has the ability to shift its shape to get into different places and to evade our nervous system or our immune system. So the bacterium of Lyme can go from a corkscrew shape, and then it can look like a cyst-like blob, and then it can look like a film. And so one of the reasons why it does this is to avoid our immune system. So put a pin in this idea of this bacterium as being a shapeshifter because it's important. So once this bacteria enters into our bloodstream, it will often change its outer surface to avoid immune response. And then it can move from the blood into the tissue and into parts of our body that other bacteria simply can't. Most people know that this bacteria is carried by what we call deer ticks or black-legged ticks. And that's how people are contracting Lyme disease, the disease that is named for basically the symptoms that's caused by this bacterium. Lyme disease itself is a mysterious illness. We're still learning a lot about Lyme. As I mentioned, this unique shape of this bacteria means it can get into really specialized places within our body. It can penetrate cell walls. It can cross the blood-brain barrier, which is quite unusual for a bacteria. It also means because it can cross that blood-brain barrier that it can get into our nervous system, our central nervous system, and affect the actions of our central nervous system. Because it can also break that blood-brain barrier, it can open us up to be more vulnerable to co-infections, which can be a large part of dealing with a journey of Lyme disease. Now, once Lyme gets into our system, it can rapidly disseminate into areas like our lymph nodes and our tissues. And so once it's in those places, it's harder to detect. And so that is another part of a lot of people's journey with Lyme, is that once it's in these harder to detect places, it's not as easy to test for. All this said, Lyme disease as we know it has been around for a very long period of time. In Otzi, the frozen caveman found in the Alps 5,000 years ago, we were able to identify and see that actually he was afflicted by what we would now call Lyme disease. So this bacterium has been around for a very long time. Scientists say that likely a predecessor of this bacterium that carries what we know as to be Lyme disease, that was likely around when human beings first came onto the scene. So this is a ancient bacteria to be in relationship with, and likely Lyme disease itself is an ancient disease. Now, that said, it is very much on the rise in the world right now. There's been a huge explosion of this disease in the past 30 to 40 years. And so we are in a moment right now where we are really learning from the teacher of this bacteria. New statistics say upwards of 400,000 people in the United States are diagnosed with Lyme disease every year. And one statistic, the CDC says that perhaps up to 15% of the population has experienced Lyme disease or has been infected with Lyme disease. 80 to 85% of people who contract Lyme disease will recover quickly. But what that means is about 15 to 20% of people do not, or 15 to 20% of people develop what's called chronic Lyme disease. And the chronic condition itself of Lyme can be complex because it can mean that you still have a Lyme infection. It could mean that you have another tick-borne disease or a co-infection, or it could be that the original infection caused systemic issues or triggered an autoimmune response. Now that we've grounded in a little bit of the science of Lyme disease, let's just take a deep breath together and look at this bacterium from a mythopoetic lens. All illnesses have their own consciousness. From a shamanic point of view, everything on this earth has their own sentience, their own awareness, their own consciousness. And the same is true for illness. And the same is certainly true for this ancient bacterium. The spirochete that causes Lyme disease has its own personality, its own energy, and its own ancestry. Now, Lyme, I will call it Lyme, but really it is this bacterium that we're talking about, right? Is an ancient shapeshifter. It is a being that can reach into the deepest levels of our body, our nervous system, our brain. It can touch the parts of us that make us feel distinctly like ourselves, right? And this is one of the reasons why when people develop Lyme disease or chronic Lyme, there's this sense of like not fully being yourself, or like there's something off on a level that's like perhaps hard to explain, but it's as if the you of you has been shifted a little bit. And that's because this bacterium is such a powerful shapeshifter. It can reach the deepest levels of our being. Now, let's look at shapeshifters in mythology. In mythology, shapeshifters are sometimes forces of benevolence, sometimes tricksters, sometimes they're bringers of danger, but they are always incredibly powerful figures that are here to help us transform, to bring things into our awareness, to help us question reality in a way that is necessary and needed. In a psychological context, the archetype of the shapeshifter is one that's thought to help us bring awareness to the subconscious parts of ourselves, the parts of us that we've had to repress or leave behind, or that we feel we've lost. The shapeshifter allows us to contact these parts again, to come back into relationship with them. Shapeshifters are catalysts for change. They help us respond to this inner desire for transformation that we all are carrying around, this soul level desire to transform and become the people that we are meant to be, to shape shift ourselves into the form that has been waiting for us in this lifetime. One archetype of the shaman is as the original shapeshifter, the person whose role it was to contact the unseen world, to move in and out of shape shifting in order to bring back information from the unseen world. And not only information, but healing as well. In many traditional contexts, whatever the word was or the word is that is being used for what we now call shamanic healing or a shaman, whether it was, healer or bruja, often the role of this person was to go into the unseen world, shape shift themselves to move into that unseen world and bring back healing for an individual person or for the community. So here we see this idea that healing lives in the unseen world and interacting with the unseen world, and that shape-shifting and interaction with the shapeshifter is required for bringing back that healing. And I want you to put a pin in this because we're going to return to this in a little bit. So for now that we've seen this bacteria from this mythopoetic, energetic, spiritual, and shamanistic viewpoint, we can see the whole picture. And we can start to move into interaction from a different place. Now that we have this in our minds and we're sitting with it, I'd love to share my story with you in the hopes that perhaps it brings in inspiration and healing for you in your life. So I first contracted Lyme disease in 2013. I was camping in Minnesota at the time, and I did not show symptoms till 5 weeks later. I did find a nymph tick on me. And when I started showing symptoms 5 weeks later, I was already in what you would call stage 3 Lyme. So by that point, I had severe headaches, dizziness, lightning pain in my joints, muscle aches in very unusual places. I started having arthritis in my joints, heart palpitations. I had what I call mind-sweltering social anxiety that seemed to come out of nowhere, bone-deep fatigue. My cognitive function had declined very rapidly in a way that I couldn't really attribute to anything else. I felt like the way I described it was like my brain was a helicopter that couldn't land, and really powerful insomnia. So I would be up till 6 or 7 in the morning most nights, and I knew something was wrong. I mean, clearly all those things would say something is wrong. But I knew that it wasn't just a normal illness, that something was going on with me. And, I had dealt with cycles of chronic illness and pain earlier in my life. And so I knew what it felt like when things were really off inside my body. And I knew that this wasn't just some run-of-the-mill bug or illness. And so I ended up going to the doctor and asking to get tested for Lyme because I knew I had been in an area where Lyme disease was prevalent, and I had known I had found a nymph tick on me. And so I went and got the test, and I tested positive for antibodies. Now, if you're aware of Lyme testing at all, it's a 2-phase journey. So I was tested for antibodies, and then I was tested with the Western blot, and that came back as negative. So from a testing point of view, I tested negative for Lyme. In the interim of getting these tests, however, I got in contact with the group of friends I had been camping with, and 5 or 6 of them had developed bullseye rashes, had been tested for Lyme and tested positive, and were currently on antibiotics. So I had strong anecdotal evidence that I was experiencing Lyme, even though these tests were negative. Now, I want to mention this because the testing for Lyme disease is notoriously tricky, and it's very easy to get misdiagnosed in both directions. I've seen this happen in both directions. People who have Lyme not getting diagnosed with Lyme via testing, and people who don't have Lyme, getting a false positive. And, one statistic I saw on PubMed said that 50% of testing misses the Lyme. So like 50% of tests are not accurate. So I'm saying this because this can be a particular journey that people with Lyme go on, that the testing is not giving them an accurate portrayal of what they're experiencing inside their body. So trust what you are experiencing. Because I had such strong anecdotal evidence that this was likely Lyme disease, I requested a month of antibiotics, and I immediately started antibiotics and an herbal protocol at the same time. I also sought out the expertise of a Lyme specialist and was clinically diagnosed with Lyme during that time. So with this clinical diagnosis in hand, I was on a month of doxycycline and was also taking herbs at the same time. My background is as an herbalist. So I had trained as an herbalist. I was already practicing with folks at the time that I contracted Lyme disease. And so I knew that I wanted to work with herbs as well as antibiotics and support myself in that way. Herbs are really helpful in tandem with antibiotics because they do help the antibiotics to cross that blood-brain barrier, which is very important. And because I already was in what you would consider stage 3 Lyme at this point, the spirochetes had already crossed that barrier, and I knew that I needed help in that capacity. So I did a bunch of different research. I did work with what I would call an amended version of Stephen Harabuner's Lyme protocol. At the time, this was one of the only protocols that was just well known or available. There's more protocols out there now. So my whole herbal protocol, what I used, the dosages that I used is on the blog post that accompanies this video. So if you're watching this video not on my website, then you can click the link below to head over to that blog post. You can see exactly the herbs that I took, the dosages that I took them in. I say all of this though with the caveat that it is really important that you have support when you are in this process, that you are consulting with your doctor or your herbalist, that my protocol is not intended to treat, diagnose, or cure, that this is me sharing from my own personal journey of what worked for me. And of course, remembering that protocols like this are based on your unique symptoms, where the bacteria is manifesting in your body, what you are experiencing. But in the spirit of sharing and inspiration, that protocol is over on my website if you'd like to check it out. I was on this herbal protocol for 8 months. I was on this herbal protocol for several of those 8 months before I added in an addition that was really helpful for me, and that addition was teasel root. So one of the things that's said about teasel root is that it's particularly helpful for the strains of Lyme that exist in Wisconsin and Minnesota. And I have found, since working with Lyme myself and working with other people who have Lyme, that doing research and adding in herbs that are specific to where you contracted the disease can be a real game changer. So that was a real game changer for me because different strains exist in different places. So that was a game changer for me to add in this herb that was local to where I contracted the disease. And I really feel that the antibiotics did an okay job. I think they took the population down somewhat. The herbs continued that good work, but I was still very much in the throes of having this disease. And through working with this clinical Lyme specialist, she recommended pulsed antibiotics. And it was something that I did try, although I did not ultimately feel like it was the right thing for me. I do feel like the herbs continue to take down the population. So that's one of the first things, right, with Lyme is we're taking down the population often of the bacteria in your body. And then we're moving towards normally strengthening our own bodies and systems and moving towards latency. So latency is where a pathogenic factor goes into basically like quiet mode within our body, where our body is strong enough to handle that disease. One of the things that's said about the bacteria that causes Lyme is that it's a bit like chickenpox, where it's something that once we contract it, it never leaves our system, that there's always probably some aspect of it in perpetuity in our body. Now, whether you believe this or not, totally up to you. But a lot of the goals normally of therapies, of herbal therapy or otherwise, is to take down the population enough and strengthen your body enough that that population can be small enough that our body can just handle it pretty much forever. So at this time, I also started acupuncture, and specifically I worked with a particular kind of acupuncture called divergent treatments. This is something that's not normally part of contemporary traditional Chinese medicine or TCM, but it is something that is practiced by different acupuncturists. It's something that is taught in the acupuncture school here where I live. And I find it to be very potent for treating things like Lyme. And so I want to mention it here. If you are in the midst of this and you're specifically wanting to work with a type of acupuncture treatment that addresses this. So divergent acupuncture treatments work with the divergent channels, which are channels that are created to deal or hold on to pathogenic factors, things that we can't fully address when we're experiencing them. So we kind of put them into these divergent channels and decide we're going to deal with them later. So oftentimes, divergent treatments are used to access the yuan level of our being in Chinese medicine, which is the deepest level of our being, the level of our being that corresponds to things like congenital issues, personality disorders, autoimmune issues. It's sort of a direct line into our soul, our life's blueprint, sort of like the deepest level of your nascent being. This yuan level of our being in these divergent channels will often work directly with the nascent channels of our body, sort of these first channels that were developed in our body, things like the brain, the heart, and the nervous system, which coincidentally are all places that Lyme disease affects. So these divergent treatments can be very intense because it's letting everything that has been in latency in your body out. So I know for me, I started experiencing in reverse chronological order illnesses, chronic pain, other maladies that I had experienced in my life, injuries, as I did these treatments. So they were very intense, but I also feel that they did a lot to bring this disease that had become latent in my body out so it could be dealt with and released. I worked with my friend, Greg Casey of Mystic Tao, for these treatments, and his information as well as all the information about the different treatments I used are over on that blog post on my website if you're interested. Now, in the midst of doing all these things, I was also, trying to rest a lot, eat healthy, drink a lot of water, really support my body in being strong enough to address this illness. Now, I believe all of these things helped me get to a place where I was functional. So I was able to go to work. I was able to see friends sometimes. But I was basically just surviving at this point. It's like things looked functional on the outside, but on the inside, I would have frequent collapses. Pretty much weekly, I would have collapses where I was not functional, where I had to be laying in bed. And so I knew that this wasn't sustainable. I knew that I needed to do something drastic in order to get to the other side of healing. And so that is when I decided, I was about 8 months in at this point, and I decided that I was going to do a whole month focused on healing. And for me, this looked like taking down everything that I did to the bare minimum, working the bare minimum of hours, resting, doing yoga every day, eating a really clean diet, and doing a meditation or shamanic journey every single day. So shamanic journeys are a form of meditation. It's a form of active meditation where you are entering into a visual or an experience with the unseen world, normally aided by some sort of rhythm. Normally drum beats, very common, but some people like to get into shamanic trance through dancing, for example. And this had been a pathway for me in my life that was really important and really helped me connect with my deepest self. So that was my goal. I said, okay, I'm going to do a journey every single day for a month. So this is what helps me heal from this first occurrence of Lyme disease. And I really believe that it was this month that was the turning point for me of all the things that I did. And there were two things in particular that really helped me turn the corner. So the first thing was focusing on boundaries during this month. Boundaries had historically been very hard for me. I am what I consider to be an empath. I am a highly sensitive person. Highly sensitive people, if you're not aware of that term, make up about 15 to 20% of the population. It is a nervous system trait. It means that you are more sensitive to external stimuli, and so it can be a beautiful thing. Like you can really feel the power of a sunset and you can really attune to someone else's feelings, but it can also be overwhelming. And it often does mean that if you're a highly sensitive person, that your nervous system gets overwhelmed more easily. And highly sensitive people have sort of naturally porous boundaries. It's sort of how we are born. And so I had struggled with boundaries. I had struggled with saying no to work projects, to requests on my energy, to time spent with friends. But one of the things that really hit home for me when I really took this concentrated time of healing was realizing that when I did what I wanted to do, when I wanted to do it, I had energy. When the moment I didn't do that, the moment I was like, well, I should do this, or this person's expecting me to do this, my energy would tank and I'd be in bed again for another 24 hours. This was a huge learning lesson for me. When I did what I wanted to do, when I wanted to do it, I actually had energy and I was healing. My body was strong. Now, this is a huge lesson for sensitives and empaths. And I would learn with time, I didn't know this at the time, but looking at the work of Gabor Mate, I would learn that this is a specific trait that often exists for people who experience chronic illness and disease. This inability to set boundaries and this difficulty with setting boundaries and this desire to people please. So I learned that I was not alone in this, and that obviously on a energetic level, this was important for my healing, but on a very physical, tangible level, not being able to set boundaries for yourself is really stressful for your system. And so the first thing that Lyme taught me that was incredibly powerfully life-changing was this ability to set a boundary and to do what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it. And the amazing thing about this, at the time I had my own business. I was also still working other jobs. But the amazing thing about it was that when I just did that, somehow it all worked out. Somehow I ended up having time for the things that I thought I'd never want to do, like bookkeeping, for example. I also realized how often I was saying yes to social engagements that were draining my energy. So this was a huge revelation for me. And this is something that Gabor Mate talks about in his books, and in one of his talks, he specifically says this quote that I wrote down because it really was meaningful to me. If you don't know how to say no when you need to, your body will say it for you in the form of chronic illness. So what I have seen over the years, because once I dealt with my iteration of Lyme disease, it just felt like people started coming out of the woodwork to find me and work with me as an herbalist for their experience with Lyme. And I saw over and over and over again, there was a very specific pattern for people who contracted Lyme disease and had it become chronic. And this pattern was that they're often people who are already several years down their path, like they're already on the path. And they're like established in certain ways in whatever it is, their life, their career, their art, their spiritual practice. But there's an aspect of them that is still living their life for other people, that is still in this process of learning that it's okay to set boundaries. And so Lyme often comes in to help teach them how to live for themselves, and that is the energy that is next needed in their life to reach the next phase of their evolution, their spiritual journey, their development, their becoming. So Lyme and the spirochete that causes it is the ultimate boundary crosser, right? We talked about, it gets into your nervous system and your brain, like the parts of you that you feel like are essentially you, right? So it's the ultimate teacher when it comes to boundaries. And I see this over and over and over again, that it's sensitives and empaths who end up dealing with chronic Lyme and being taught basically by this disease how to use their energy, how they're meant to use this energy in this lifetime to really feed their own creativity and their own projects. So I was learning this at the same time that I was doing these journeys every single day. And, for me, shamanic journeying is an important way that I connect into my deepest self and the unseen world. Everyone's going to have their own ways of connecting. So maybe for you, it's journaling, maybe it's prayer, maybe it's dance, maybe it's channeling. But I've seen over and over again that this spiritual connection is incredibly important for healing chronic Lyme. One subjective study done at the University of Antioch found that 100% of the people they interviewed who healed from chronic Lyme believed that their spiritual connection was innate and essential to their healing, that this sense of spiritual connection, awakening, and transformation was at the heart of their ability to heal. So over the course of this month of journeying, I learned so much about myself, about my ability to set boundaries, about who I am, about why I'm here, and how to use my energy. And I went from probably being at a 50% at that point in my health to an 80%. And to me, that felt great. To me, that was like, okay, this is healing. And on the other side, I felt like, I think I can let go of the herbal protocol. I don't think I need to revisit the idea of pulsed antibiotics anymore. This is totally livable. That said, I did have some things that were, I didn't use the word worse. I used the word different. Some things were different. So I still had some joint pain. I still had headaches, and I still had lower energy. But I thought, you know what? I can deal with different. This is just different. But a powerful healing took place inside of my body. And after that month of deeply connecting to myself and to the healing and the teachings that this disease was bringing in, I felt like I had reached the other side. So all this said, lessons tend to stick better the second time around. So a little over a year later, I contracted Lyme disease again. Now, the second time that I caught Lyme, it was at an event that I was traveling for. It was a big, beautiful wedding in Rhode Island for dear friends who I loved. And yet I knew, looking at my schedule, that it was going to be stressful. I knew that it was going to be hard for me to make it, that it would take a lot out of me. And it was the first time I remembered, after that big learning lesson of Lyme, of realizing the core message for me, which was to do what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it. It was the first time I was doing something that I knew was not in alignment with what I needed energetically at that time. But I loved these friends. I thought, there's no way I'm going to miss this. I'm going. And I came back with 4 nymph ticks and once again contracted Lyme disease. And once again, what was really fascinating about this experience was that there was a large portion of the wedding party who also got Lyme disease. So I had a very strong confirmation that this is exactly what I was dealing with again. I knew what this was because all the same symptoms came back all over again. And I immediately went on antibiotics and immediately started my herbal protocol again. And I thought, okay, I've learned this lesson, right? I healed once, I can heal again. But my health just spiraled. So, none of these ways of working with it were helping again. And I was several months in of both antibiotics and herbs when I had a dream. And in the dream, a beautiful white-haired woman came out from a log at the edge of the woods, and she handed me a rattle. And she said, "Shamanism will heal you from Lyme disease." And I woke up. And I was a little disappointed because I was like, well, we're going to have the healing now, or when is this going to happen? But it was a very, very clear, strong message for me. And it just so happened that a few weeks later, I had a wonderful friend coming to visit me, my friend Julie Travis of Stoneflower Healing. And Julie is a shamanic practitioner. And I was telling her about this dream that I had and, this experience. And she said, well, let's do an extraction. If you're up for it, let's try this shamanic extraction. And, we'll just see what happens. And I was game, because here I was several years down this path of Lyme in one iteration or another, having contracted it for the second time. And I thought, what do I have to lose? We were doing this ritual, and at one point she looked into my eyes and spoke to the consciousness of this bacteria and then spoke to me and asked me if I was willing to completely let go of this disease. And what I found really shocked me. Even though I said yes, there was a part of me that was reluctant. And I was so surprised by this because on the outside, I would think, of course, like I've been for years in one iteration or another dealing with this particular illness and this disease, and I don't want to be anymore. But there was a part of me that was holding on. And for me, my truth is that, because my own awakening experience, the thing that led me to the altar of the green world, that opened up my spiritual awareness of the world, was dealing with chronic illness and chronic pain in my early 20s. This was obviously pre-Lyme. But because I had that experience, I realized in this session that I had this awareness that there was a part of me that was holding on to this because I thought, oh, this is how you heal. This is how you evolve. This is how you connect to spirit, is through being ill. And so I had this powerful realization that there was actually a part of me that was holding on to this illness in order to learn. And at the end of the session, I thought, okay, well, that was a powerful realization. And if nothing else, that will really help me. But within a week, every symptom that I had had for the past 2 years of these 2 bouts with Lyme disease completely evaporated. And I was shocked, really completely shocked by this. Especially after all the different things I tried, all the treatments, all the angles and ways of dealing with this. And that for me was a complete healing. So that was, at the end of 2015. And at the time of recording this, it is 2023. And I have not had a symptom of Lyme since then. And, for me, looking back on this particular journey, I know that what healed me was learning how to hold boundaries, learning how to connect to the truth of who I am, how my energy wants to be used, what's right for me and what isn't, understanding that I'm a highly sensitive person, and that part of my journey, a large part of my journey, is to work in the realms of the unseen, to work in the realms that would be called energetic or shamanic. And I had already been working in those realms before this time, but this was an initiation for me to go deeper. And so for me, this is how I healed. And as I mentioned, on the other side of this disease, I seemed to have people come out of the woodwork who were also dealing with Lyme to come work with me, both as an herbalist and as an energetic practitioner. I did intuitive readings at the time. I did energy healing. And I saw several core components and takeaways from my own journey, as well as the journeys of those who I worked with. So these are the core things that I noticed that helped people heal. The first thing is for them to work with medicines that they really resonated with. So, some people really felt comfortable with antibiotics and felt like they really were good for them. They really worked for them. They'd been helpful in the past. And that tended to really help those people. Other people were, really passionate about herbs, or they felt really connected to the plants outside their home, and that really helped them. Obviously, in my experience, connecting on a shamanic level was extremely important for me in order to experience this healing. So working with medicines that resonate with you, and this is really just part and parcel of working with your body. working with your body, not against your body. This is all an initiation in working with your body. So working with the medicines that you trust that resonate for you and your nervous system. The second thing I saw in every person I worked with and with my own self is this call to recognize who you are. And by and large, every person that I worked with was a sensitive person, was someone who was ready for the next step of their journey, but was also ready to reckon with the ways in which they were using their energy for people or things or ventures that were not healing for them, that were not here to bolster or support their systems. So it was a call to really claim their own energy, to really claim their energy in this lifetime, to claim their power in this way, and to step into this next phase of their journey through setting these boundaries once more. And so, this deep awareness of energy, where it needs to go and where it doesn't need to go, was healing on so many levels for people. And so even on a very tangible physical level, when we reclaim this energy, we then have energy for our body to deal with this bacterium, with this ancient consciousness, and to be in that negotiation and to be in that healing. I also saw time and time again, and I know I've mentioned this several times, but it's very important that healing looked different for each person, and that's an exciting thing, because the healing that comes in the way that it came in was coming in specifically to show people, what is your curriculum in this lifetime? What are you being asked to work with? The thing that healed them was the very thing that was calling them forward in their own lives. And so it was an invitation to go on this journey to find out what healing looks like, because through that journey, you find out who you're here to become. Now, that said, that journey of healing for the folks that I worked with who were dealing with chronic Lyme, and obviously for my own self, that journey normally is taking people into this deeper terrain of working with the unseen, of working with these aspects of themselves that are ready to come out and flourish, be seen, for these unseen aspects of the world. I mean, chronic illness itself is an unseen experience. You're working with something that you cannot necessarily see inside of your own body, but that is very much there and is very much affecting you. And so when we can embrace the idea that illness is a teacher, that Lyme is a teacher, and that these experiences are coming in to teach us on an energetic level, on a physical level, on a spiritual level, that when you embrace them as teachers, that is when healing happens. And that, at the end of the day, was the thing that helped people transcend who I worked with. So this is the story of how I healed from Lyme disease. And this is the story of what I have seen to be helpful for people who are dealing with chronic Lyme. This is something that has become central in my own life and in my own practice and my own teachings and understandings. I have personally lived with chronic illness and pain, different cycles of it, for over a decade, and working with thousands of people around the world. And I have seen that over and over and over again, when we can approach illness as a teacher, this is when we initiate the next era in our life, and this is when we initiate our healing. So if any of this is resonating with you, if you are experiencing Lyme or another chronic illness, I would love if you joined me in my class, Illness as Teacher. It's completely free. It's something that feels like it's a part of my life path and my healing to be able to offer. It's a live class that's happening on September 28th. So if you sign up now, you can join us live. If you can't join live, then you can sign up and get the replay later. Or if you're listening to this later, you can still sign up and receive that replay now. I have found this awareness and this framing of illness as a teacher to be really powerful for inviting in the healing that we're meant to experience in this lifetime. So in the class, we're going to talk about what kind of people end up having illness be a big part of their journey, and specifically what it means about, who you are and who you're meant to become, and specifically the gifts that you're meant to embody. Because illness comes in as a teacher. And the thing that happens when we embrace illness as a teacher is then we embrace the parts of ourselves that are ready to be manifest in this lifetime. We embrace our own curriculum and life path. And the cool thing that happens when you embrace illness as a teacher is you embrace your path as a teacher. And I've seen this over and over and over again, that illness comes in as a teacher. And our job is to embrace that teacher as a student. And when we do that, when we can do that fully, then we become teachers in this lifetime. The author Caroline Myss has this really wonderful quote that I think encapsulates it. She writes, "When illness is part of your spiritual journey, no medical intervention can heal you until your spirit has begun to make the changes that the illness was designed to inspire." And what I have seen is that folks who are dealing with chronic illness are often being called to this deeper path, this spiritual path in their life, and called deeper perhaps than they've gone before, because often they're already walking that path, but there is something here waiting for you. And so there's this awareness or this ability to understand who you are. And through this class, Illness as Teacher, we're going to touch into the question that we all want to know, which is why? Why am I experiencing this? Why is this a part of my life? Because illness is really hard. It's a really huge, big path to choose. Powerful souls are the ones who choose it. And it's important that we have support along the way. And it's important that we have these moments and these times to stop and orient together to the teacher and to the teaching that's coming in. Because what I have found is that when we can connect with illness as a teacher, that's when healing streams in. That's when we step into the path that we are meant to walk in this lifetime. And that is when the rest of our life begins. So if you're interested in this class, there is a link to sign up below. You can join me live or listen to the replay at any time. I am feeling really excited about being able to offer this opportunity for healing and connection. And so if this is something that's resonating with you, I would absolutely love to see you there. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope that it brought in some windows of possibility for you, because what I have seen time and time again is that healing is always possible, that there is a deeper benevolence to absolutely everything we experience on this planet, and that the hardship of the journey is here to open us to the deep well of gifts that we carry, to the undimmable radiance of our own spirit and the powerful lives of healing and beauty and learning and becoming that we're here to experience. So wherever you are on your healing journey, may you find exactly what you need to keep walking that path and to heal.